Hey, this is Warren Redlick with an episode of FUD Fighters. We're not Foo Fighters, we're FUD Fighters. We got this dude here, unnamed talking head, not sure if he's actually one of the people involved with this or just an actor, reciting BS from overcharged expectations, this nonsense that came out of Texas Public Policy Foundation. Before we dive into it, I just want to give you a little bit of background here. Number one, their video had comments turned off. That's how confident they are in their content. Texas Public Policy Foundation doesn't seem very important. They don't have a big following. You can see like very little engagement on their posts critical of EVs. 550 views is nothing, but you can see what they publish is used by others. So Disclose TV, whoever they are, use the publication that I'm talking about from Texas Policy, got 5 million views spreading FUD about electric vehicles. So let's dive into what the FUD is. First of all, take a listen to Talking Head.
Very few Americans know the real cost of electric vehicles. If they did, they'd be shocked. While the average electric car costs $66,000, that's
The average electric car costs $66,000. Let's think about that for a minute. Leaving out the tax credit, you can buy a Tesla Model 3 for around $40,000, and you can buy a Tesla Model Y for around $50,000. Those are the two largest volume electric vehicles sold in America, and their average price is somewhere around $45,000. Now, it's true that a Model S and a Model X cost more than $66,000, but they're very low volume, and it's true that there are some other EVs sold by companies that aren't very good at making or selling EVs that are selling for more than that. But I think we can agree that if the largest volume EVs in America are the Model 3 and the Model Y, and they're selling for an average of less than $50,000, this number's a little suspicious. But we got a lot more coming.
what you aren't going to hear is that the average EV is currently the beneficiary of nearly $50,000 in regulatory credits, subsidies, and avoided taxes and fees.
One of the critical things I'm going to do in this video is debunk this claim that there's 50,000. In particular, there's a claim that there's like $27,000 in regulatory credits per EV sold. If you follow Tesla's earnings statements, you probably already know where I'm going with this. And they do acknowledge it, and we'll talk about their take on that. But number one, there's this claim, there is some truth to the lie. It is true that there are some subsidies, there are some tax breaks for electric vehicles. What this obvious oil industry shill is ignoring is the massive subsidy to internal combustion engine vehicles in the fossil fuel industry. The massive subsidies have been going on for decades. The $1 trillion we spend a year defending the oil flow. Like, if we weren't spending all that money bringing the flow of oil from the Middle East to America or providing the flow of oil to the world, what would the price of gasoline be? I don't know. What kind of subsidies has the government given to Ford and GM and Chrysler over the years? Lots. What kind of tax breaks and other breaks have all these regular combustion and not to mention the fossil fuel industry? What kind of breaks have they gotten? They're not evaluating any of that in their analysis. They're only targeting the subsidies for EVs. If you're going to do a balanced evaluation, you would want to look at both sides. I'm personally not an advocate for subsidies for EVs, regulatory credits, any of it. I don't think Tesla needs that. Those credits, those benefits are really designed to like give Ford and GM a shot at surviving. They're not really designed to help Tesla. Tesla doesn't need the help. And you'll see that. But regardless, they got some details critically wrong, and we're going to dive into it.
The federal government is using subsidies and regulatory tricks to hide and socialize these costs to taxpayers and to those buying gasoline vehicles.
Now, you notice the language socialize. It's not socialism when the federal government bails out Ford, GM, and Chrysler, Stellantis. It's not socialism when the government provides all these benefits to the oil companies. But socialism, this is a pitch to Republicans in Texas. It's a pitch to Republicans in general. And so you use the word socialism because that's a word that's appealing to your target audience. I'm really focused on how propaganda is flying, and the FUD is part of a anti-Tesla, anti-EV propaganda. And this organization is very anti-renewables. They're anti-wind. They're anti-solar. Apparently, they're anti-battery packs. None of it makes sense. But this is who they are. Most likely funded by the fossil fuel industry. I didn't dive into it. I don't know who's funding them, but it's pretty obvious that this is propaganda that's designed to attack EVs and deter people from buying EVs and deter political support for EVs, while of course not saying anything about all the benefits that the oil companies get and the internal combustion engine companies get.
Recently, the EPA released its new proposed standards for automobiles, and let's just say this: the auto industry is not a free market.
What is a free market? Where is this free market that everyone talks about? But again, free market, they're going for sort of Republican conservative ideology. I believe in free markets. I don't think we have a free market anyway. We certainly don't have a free market for Tesla to sell cars in states that have rules that require dealerships or protect dealerships. Why isn't he complaining about why Texas doesn't allow Tesla to open stores to sell cars? There are regulatory hurdles that make it harder for Tesla to sell cars, to sell EVs. I don't hear him complaining about that. Gee, what's going on there, Billy Bob? I have no idea what his name is.
Fuel economy standards are making gasoline vehicles more expensive to manufacture and buy, while subsidies artificially lower the cost of building EVs.
Again, some of this is true. The question is, how important is it? And how much is he ignoring the subsidies to the fossil fuel industry and internal combustion engine vehicles? And then, is there a value in encouraging people to buy EVs, to have more EVs on the road and less gas vehicles on the road? We know that air pollution kills. Even if you leave aside everything else, if you leave aside climate change and all that, we know that air pollution kills. We also know that eventually, at some point, we will run out of fossil fuels and we need an alternative. Is there a value in this? Do I believe government should be playing this role? Actually, no. I think government should stay out of it. But given the extent to which government intervenes in our economy in so many other ways, why is this the one that draws your attention? This is the one thing that we must stop. Why is this the focus of the Texas Public Policy Institute? Well, who do you think is funding them?
So, auto manufacturers are building more and more electric vehicles, but these cars don't sell.
It is true that automobile makers other automobile makers are having trouble selling their cars, their EVs. They're not actually making more. It seems like they're struggling and they're not making more. This video is not that old. This is like a week old. So why they're so far behind the times, I don't know. But the practical reality is that a lot of the the legacy automakers are struggling to make more EVs, and they certainly are struggling to sell them. But Tesla is not really struggling to sell their EVs. Tesla is selling their cars. Is the price coming down? Is the margin coming down? Yes, but Tesla's selling every car they make. Tesla's inventory is around 10 or 15 days of cars. The other car makers have like a 100-day inventory or more. And yeah, Lucid Motors can't sell their cars because they're idiots. But, and Ford is having trouble selling the Lightning, the Mach-E, whatever. They're all having trouble because their EVs aren't that good. They're not marketing them well. They have all kinds of other issues with them. But the largest EV makers in the world, Tesla, BYD, the other Chinese companies are making a lot of EVs and selling them.
Car lots are swelling with unsold EVs, and it's costing manufacturers billions of dollars.
I'm not sure that the unsold EVs are costing manufacturers billions of dollars. It's certainly not costing Tesla anything because Tesla doesn't have unsold EVs. I don't think the failure to sell a small volume of Lightnings and Mach-E's, having them sit on lots, I don't think that's necessarily the problem. I don't think it's costing them billions. It's costing them money. We can agree on that. Billion. This is again sort of like a propaganda term. Let's say billions of dollars, and who cares whether it's true? Maybe it's 1 billion. Is that billions? Is it 1.5 billion? When does it become billions? I would say it has to be at least 2 billion. Is that measured? Has anybody accounted for that? And does it really matter? No.
Ford is losing over $70,000 on each electric vehicle it sells, and the buyers of gasoline vehicles are paying more to pick up that slack.
That's not exactly true. Let's not forget that the federal government just gave Ford a big chunk of money. So the cost of the EVs is probably being absorbed by the money that the federal government is handing over to Ford and GM. There's some, I don't know, subsidy package, whatever. So is that really affecting the price or the cost of building gasoline vehicles? Are there some impacts that are increasing the cost of building gasoline vehicles? Sure. Is this really the big deal that he's making of it? No, it's not.
The Wall Street Journal correctly describes this as force feeding the production of electric vehicles, whether or not consumers want them.
So the thing here is this: whether or not consumers want them. Consumers do want electric vehicles. There aren't enough electric vehicles for the consumption, and the price of electric vehicles hasn't gotten to the price point where people are ready for them. And having propaganda like this guy attacking EVs and diminishing the perception of EVs is not helpful at all. And there's this sort of question: do you see us heading towards a world of electric vehicles or not? right? If you are in the camp that I'll never buy an EV and EVs aren't good and blah, 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 okay, fine. But then, and I can understand that. But if you drive a Tesla Model 3 or a Model Y or a Model S or a Model X, you get it. And frankly, even the Mach E, people make fun of the Mach E, people make fun of the Ford Lightning. They're not bad. They're not up to the standard that I expect from Tesla, but they're not bad. And the Mach E, I was with a professional race car driver at a track, and he was driving the Mach E, and he said it was the best Ford he'd ever driven. Blake Fuller drove a Model 3 in the Pikes Peak Challenge, and he was driving a Mach E, performance version of the Mach E on the track at Sebring. He loved it. So this notion that there's some sort of problem with the Ford EVs, maybe they need to get the word out. Maybe they need to do a better job of selling their cars, but they're not bad. They're actually not bad. The Ford EVs are not that bad. Again, not Tesla standard, but not bad. Better than gas cars for sure.
Pushing EVs means that Americans just won't be able to afford cars anymore. 53% of Americans have no emergency savings.
53% of Americans have no emergency savings. What does that have to do with anything? What? Then they can't buy any car. Like, what difference does it make? If they have no emergency savings, how are they buying any car at all? How is this helpful? I think we're talking about marketing cars to the people who can afford to buy cars. If you can't afford to buy a $50,000 Tesla, then you can't afford to buy a $50,000 other car. If you can't afford to buy a $35,000 Tesla Model 3, then what other new car are you buying? Right? What fantasy land is this guy living in that there's some car that's affordable to people who have no money? If they have no money, they can't buy cars. So that's a useless statistic.
32% of Americans have paid a bill late in the last 6 months, most of them because they just didn't have enough money.
How does he know why they paid a bill late? Most of them just because, well, probably. I don't know. This is just like random nonsense he's just throwing in there. Like, and honestly, the 53% have no emergency savings, 32% have paid a bill late. That's Democrat talking points. Which side are you on again? This is the Democrat side talking. Why are you slipping Democrat talking points into your obviously Republican pandering language? I don't know.
How would they be able to afford an electric vehicle?
How would who be able to afford an electric vehicle? As you're going to see later, Tesla sells about 2% of the total cars in the new car market. Tesla doesn't need to sell to the 53% of people who can't afford to buy a car. They just need to sell to the 47% or the 40% or the 30% who can. I don't know what percent of the American public. I mean, American public buys about 15 million cars a year. There's 340 million people in America. So we're talking about like 5% of Americans are buying a new car a year, right? So really maybe 20, 30% of Americans are buying new cars. So worrying about the 50% or 60% who can't afford to buy a $30,000, $40,000 car is kind of irrelevant. We're not going for that market. Nobody's saying that EVs are going to that market. They're trying to sell EVs to people who can't afford to buy cars, right? And if you can afford to buy a BMW 3 Series, you can afford to buy a Model 3. If you can afford to buy a Camry V6, you can afford to buy a Tesla Model 3. If you can afford to buy a Toyota Highlander, you can afford to buy a Tesla Model Y. Camry, Highlander, Corolla, these are the highest volume cars in America after the Model Y. Model 3 and Model Y, very high volume vehicles. People can't afford them.
Even if they had savings, the average American worker makes just under $48,000 a year.
Okay, so if the average American worker makes $48,000 a year and US GDP per capita is $73,000, how does the average, and per capita means per person, not per worker. How is the average American worker making less than $48,000 a year when GDP per capita is $72,000? I think the average American worker is actually making in the ballpark of $100,000 a year. I don't know how this GDP per capita thing works, but if the economy is generating $72,000, $75,000, $77,000 a year per person, not per worker, but per person, then there's a hell of a lot more money out there per worker than $48,000. I don't know how the economics works, but that $48,000 number, that sounds like BS. Now, maybe the median worker makes $48,000, but $48,000 is $24 an hour. Like almost any salaried worker is making more than 20. I mean, there's a group of workers who are making less than that, but there's a whole bunch of people making a whole bunch more than that. There's a whole bunch of people making over $100,000 a year. So, and Tesla's selling 2% of the cars, 3, 4, 5% of the cars. There's plenty of people who are buying Camrys, they're buying Lexus, they're buying BMW and Mercedes. They can afford EVs. This is not a problem.
Nearly enough to afford a $66,000 EV.
Okay, again, you notice he brings back the $66,000 number. Well, who's the $66,000 car that he's talking about? I don't even know if you can buy a Model Y for $66,000. I think the top price for a Model Y is maybe less than $60,000. I don't know what the numbers are. I think generally speaking, you're talking about $50,000 for Model Y, $40,000 for Model 3. So which is this $66,000 EV that people can't afford to buy? The top volume EVs and top volume cars in America, the Model Y and Model 3, and they're a lot less than that. And then you take into account the tax credit, a lot of people can't afford them.
Environmental, social, and governance, ESG, that's the framework these Biden administration policies are implemented under.
Okay, again, you notice the talking points. He keeps hitting the Biden administration. It's always about the Biden administration. Biden administration is the bad guys. Doesn't take any shots at Ron. I love Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis has promoted solar. He's promoted all kinds of things in Florida. He uses the term ESG. That's something that's been demonized by the Republicans. I'm not a fan of ESG. Elon's not a fan of ESG. But does this guy actually care about ESG, or is it just a talking point? Of course, he doesn't care about anything. He's just an actor. But the Texas Public Policy Foundation, do they actually care about ESG, or is it just a talking point to throw in there as red meat to your audience? I think we know the answer.
The more the Biden administration and large financial institutions use coercion to push ESG, the more companies and individuals are forced to accept it.
Well, I'm not a big fan of government. I'm not a fan of big government. That's kind of how government works. I'm not in favor of it. I'm perfectly happy to get rid of the subsidies and get rid of the tax breaks. But then, the federal government had to stop giving cash to GM and Ford and Chrysler, Stellantis, and they would go bankrupt, and that would probably cause disruption in America that wouldn't be politically popular. And Texas Public Policy Foundation probably wouldn't want to take credit for driving Ford, GM, and Stellantis into bankruptcy. Probably. People like their F-150s in Texas, and they're not going to like it if Ford goes out of business. So, take your pick. You decide what you want.
What they're really accepting is poverty without any actual environmental impact.
Let me just address the without any environmental impact. It is very clear that Teslas are very positive for the environment. This is ignoring facts. This is ignoring, because that fact is inconvenient for their story. The very simple truth is that Teslas are very positive for the environment. Teslas pollute a lot less than gas cars. Teslas consume a lot less energy than gas cars. They are more efficient. Electric vehicles are more efficient than gas vehicles. They don't, yes, it's true that some of the grid is fossil fuel, but it's not that high a percentage of the grid. And even if the entire grid was fossil fuel, Teslas would still be more efficient than gas cars. But we have a grid that is increasing amounts of solar, increasing amount of wind. There's lots of wind in Texas. There's lots of solar in Texas. There's lots of solar growing all over the country, wind growing all over the country. And you have hydro, and you have some nuclear. There's a lot of pieces to the energy supply that aren't fossil fuels, that aren't polluting. So yeah, EVs, Teslas in particular, are efficient, and they are better for the environment.
Exploiting the American people. ESG and electric vehicles are a scam.
Exploiting the American people because the oil companies have never exploited the American people, because the car companies have never exploited the American people. Anybody who's trying to sell anything is in some sense trying to exploit the customer, right? You're trying to serve the customer, but you're trying to get money from the customer. And you can call anything exploitation if you want to. That's just, again, propaganda language. That's this nonsense. So the Texas Public Policy Foundation, they're on X at TPPF. Not a particularly big following, not a particularly engaged audience. You can see they've done some posts here, like I showed you earlier, 550 views, criticizing EVs on July 12th, back in October 9, 2020. EV advocates and salesmen like Musk love to compare battery development to innovations in computing, but that's not how it works. Batteries only improve by a few percent each year, says TPPF's Brent Bennett. Brent Bennett is the author of this study that we're going to dive into in a minute, or one of the co-authors of the study. Now, it's true that computer chips improve faster than batteries, but batteries are improving, and a few percent a year is actually quite a big deal, because we're already at the point where they're practically valuable for cars. And it's not really necessarily about improving the energy density, which only improves a few percent each year. It's about improving the cost per kilowatt hour and improving the way the vehicles are manufactured to take advantage of the batteries. And Tesla has been making leaps and bounds and massive improvements in that over the last several years. The fact that batteries don't improve as fast as computer chips doesn't matter. What matters is that they're already good enough and they're still improving. That's what's important here. So again, you have this big 5 million views post saying the true cost of fueling an electric vehicle, including blah, 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 is equal to $17.33 per gallon of gasoline. We're going to die. That's based on this analysis from Texas Public Policy Foundation. So let's see what they've said. Their executive summary. While an average EV is about $22,000 more, that's this study here, overcharged expectations. While an average EV is about $22,000 more expensive to purchase than a comparable ICE vehicle, again, that's old news, right? That's not true anymore. The average EV, a Model 3, is $40,000 after tax credit. If you go with a tax credit, it's $32,500, something like that. I've even seen deals where you can buy a new Model 3 for under $30,000. It's basically the same price as a Camry V6. It's a better car than a Toyota Camry, and it costs the same price or less, depending on how you measure it. Same thing with the Model Y and the Toyota Highlander. Camry is one of the most popular vehicles in America. Highlander is one of the most popular vehicles in America. Teslas are price competitive. They're not $22,000 more expensive than a comparable ICE vehicle. And really, a Model 3 is more comparable to a BMW 3 Series, and it's less expensive. A Model Y is comparable to a BMW X3 or a BMW X5. I would compare a Model 3 to a BMW 5 Series. It's much cheaper than those cars. Especially when you look at acceleration numbers, the performance Model 3 is insanely fast. And I think the new Model 3 might have a plaid powertrain. That's going to be mind-blowing if they do that. So then they acknowledge that they cost $14,000 less to fuel, insure, and maintain over a 15-year period. I think that's a massive underestimate of how much you save on a vehicle over 15 years. I think you save more than that by a lot. I'm not even getting into how much baloney that number is. We're going to focus on some other numbers in here. They have a big focus on regulatory credits. Regulatory credits is a big driver in their analysis. And you have this thing here, despite massive incentives, you saw this in the video, EVs are receiving a tepid response from the majority of Americans who cannot shoulder their house. It's not about the majority of Americans. It's about car buyers. It's about new car buyers. It's not even about used car buyers. It's about new car buyers. What are new car buyers going to buy? Tesla is the strongest brand. People want to buy Teslas. They either can't afford them or they don't think they can afford them. And, that's a challenge for Tesla. Does Tesla need to advertise? It's a whole other question. Car lots are swelling with unsold EVs. Tesla's lots are not swelling with unsold EVs. No. And the Ford Motor Company is losing over 70,000. Well, that's Ford's problem. That's not Tesla's problem. EV enthusiasts are holding out for breakthroughs in battery technology. No, we're not. The batteries are already good enough. The lithium iron phosphate batteries that are less expensive are already good enough to be fine in a standard range Model 3 and a rear-wheel drive Model Y. They're already good enough that lots of people will buy them with those batteries. And we're seeing the massive improvement that we're seeing is in Tesla's manufacturing of 4680. We're seeing drops in battery prices in China. There's lots of positive news going on here. So they do need to reduce prices and make EVs more widespread. That's happening. It's not just battery technology that needs to improve. Battery technology is part of it, but how you manufacture vehicles is part of it. Tesla's figured out how to crack that nut. There's lots of good things going on, and they're driving down the prices. And focusing on battery tech, but advances in battery technology are measured not in months, but in decades. No, that's not true. That's just simply not true. Tesla has already increased the energy density of the 4680 10%. They're moving on to the next generation Cybercell, and they're working on a next generation. You're going to see significant improvements in battery technology every year or two that are going to make a significant difference. We've got sodium-ion battery technology coming out. We've got manganese, lithium iron phosphate batteries doped with manganese. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to be, but there's a lot of new battery technology happening. There's a lot of innovation going on, both at Tesla and in China. And this guy probably, first, again, he's a talking head, but this TPPF people, either they don't know or they're lying. So we have this claim here that an EV manufacturer whose model year 2021 vehicles averaged 113 miles per gallon would earn $27,881 in credits per EV. And they kind of get it down to like $20,000 after doing some monkey business with the numbers. Like, okay, so $20,000 to $28,000 in regulatory credits per vehicle. It's really weird because when you look at Tesla's Q3 numbers, you see that Tesla's basically going to make around $1.8 billion in regulatory credits in the year 2023. This is a rough estimate. It could be $2 billion, but it's in the ballpark of $1.8 billion in regulatory credits for the year 2023. And they're going to sell about 1.8 million cars. So that's $1,000 a car. It's not $20,000 a car. It's not $28,000 a car. So I don't know how they're going to punch their way out of this paper bag. But they say here Tesla only reported $1.5 billion in automotive regulatory credits in 2021. But because there's no, and again, in 2021, Tesla didn't sell 1.8 million cars. They sold 900,000 cars, I think, in 2021. I think it was 900 and some thousand. I think it was 936,000 in 2021. So that was closer to $2,000 a car. Then they went up to 1.3 billion in 2022. So, but they're looking back at 2021. It says, but because there's no required reporting or public tracking of these credits, it's entirely possible that Tesla is trading credits for parts or other in-kind favors that may not show up on income statements. So Tesla is somehow masking $19,000 a car in benefits. This is an accusation of accounting fraud. This is straightforward an accusation of accounting fraud. That they are claiming that somehow Tesla is actually getting $20,000 in regulatory credits per car when Tesla is reporting $1,000 in regulatory credits per car. This is a shocking accusation, and it deserves more backup than it's entirely possible that. It's also entirely possible that these guys are full of it. They're wrong. They know they're wrong. They know they're lying because they're engaged in propaganda. That seems a lot more likely that Tesla is hiding $27,000 or $19,000 in extra regulatory credits. I don't know where they would sneak that in. Maybe that's why Zach Kirkhorn left the company, right? Because you caught me. But more likely, they're getting $1,000 in regulatory credits per vehicle, and these guys are lying, and that tells you what you can conclude about their other numbers. Then they go, let's assume just a little other detail here. Let's assume the average fuel economy of Tesla's 2021 fleet is 113 miles per gallon, the same as the average efficiency of the 300-mile range of EVs. I think this is a ballpark correct that Tesla gets about 100, 110, 113 effective miles per gallon. And that Tesla's 302,000 vehicles sold in the US in 2021 were 2% of the total vehicles sold in the US. By the way, the regulatory credits, Tesla sells 1.8 million vehicles. I think they're getting regulatory credits in other countries, is not just America, just to be clear about that. But Tesla's vehicles were 2% of total vehicles sold in the US in 2021. Therefore, so number one, Tesla's sales are growing, right? Tesla sold in the year 2021, Tesla sold like 936,000 vehicles or something like that. And they're going for 1.3 million this year, and they're going for last year and 1.8 million this year. So, 2% of the total vehicles sold in the US in 2021. Hey, it's 4% now. Are we looking at the future? Or are we looking at the past? What's the goal here? Therefore, Tesla sales raised the fuel economy of the total fleet sold by 1.54 miles per gallon. However, new vehicles are only a small portion of the total vehicles on the road. Yeah, okay. We acknowledge it's going to take time to convert the fleet to electric vehicles, but we're not going to get there if we don't do it. So, why play with these numbers? What is the important point here? They're criticizing the policy. I'm not a fan of government subsidies, government regulatory credits, all this stuff. I think government should stay out of the game, but give me an economy where government isn't sticking their finger in every other business in the world. You give me a society where government is not messing around everywhere. Okay, let's do that. Let's get to where the government isn't messing around everywhere, and then we can talk. Right? But what we have is, I'll brag about this here, Tesla's turning impossible and delayed. The Texas Public Policy Foundation needs to be less wrong. So please check out the t-shirts at elonbits.com. Please check out my new book, Shelby Hits the Fan, on Amazon. Shelby Hits the Fan, a novel. Take you about 2 hours to read it if you're a native English speaker. It's cheap. It's $2.99 on Kindle, $4.99 on paperback. And I love the book, and my friends have loved it. People who've read it tell me they love the book. Check it out. Fun story. So yeah, that's this episode of FUD Fighting. I think there's more coming. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Please check out the shirts at elonbits.com. Thank you so much for watching.